Hello and welcome to another 120 Dublin Stories with Santa Rita and the Little Museum. So today's talk is a special talk in association with the National Museums of Northern Ireland to link into our current temporary exhibition, You Say You Love Me, but You Don't Even Know Me. This is being run in partnership with the Department of Foreign Affairs. Now, my guest joining me today is Victoria Millar, the Senior Curator of History within the National Museums NI. Victoria, thanks so much for taking the time.
No problem at all. Thanks very much for inviting me along.
Oh, I'm so delighted. So Victoria, I've got loads of questions. I'm going to just jump straight in. I know you had joined the National Museums NI not too long before or you taken on this role with the National Museums not too long before the pandemic began. And so I'd love you just to tell me a little bit about the experience of actually taking on and getting familiar with and getting to know your collection during such a unique, I dare say, challenging time.
Yeah, so I started with National Museums NI in September 2018. And for the first year, I was working on a project which looked to digitise a significant proportion of our sound recordings. I was in that post for a year, and then the position as Senior Curator of History came up. So I started that in August, September time 2019. So really, thinking about the pandemic then, we really only did have about 6 months or so before the pandemic kicked in around March 2020. So that was, quite a challenge in the sense that I was really just still getting to know the collections. And then the pandemic hit, and part of my role, I cover kind of two sites within National Museums and my remit. So we've got 4 museums in total. We've got the Ulster Museum in Belfast City Centre. We've got the Folk Museum, the Ulster Folk Museum at Cultraw, and next door to that's the Transport Museum. Mm-hmm. And then we also have the Ulster American Folk Park in Omagh. So my job covers both the Folk Museum in Cultraw and the Folk Park in Omagh, and they're 70 odd miles apart. So there was quite a lot to contend with when I first started in terms of sort of the geographic spread of the museums and collections that I work with, and staff as well, but also then throwing in the pandemic into the mix, and then everybody kind of adjusting to working online and kind of relying on our museum database, which thankfully we were able to access from home. So I was still able to kind of get to know the collection, but maybe not obviously in person for quite a while. So yeah, it was a strange situation.
Yeah, gotta say. And so you're Senior Curator of History, so give me a sense of your collection. What sort of artifacts would be under your care?
Right, so both of the museums that I work at, we would class as outdoor museums. By what we mean by that is we've got objects in galleries environments. So we've got at the Folk Park in Omagh, at the minute we've got a new temporary exhibition and a sort of permanent exhibition there. But alongside that, we have the Outdoor Museum, which contains various buildings from across Ulster. And the same then applies to the Folk Museum at Cultraw. We've got over 50 buildings there in the Outdoor Museum. They both tell different stories. So at the Ulster Folk Museum at Cultraw, we're really looking at what life was like 100 or so years ago. And it's split into the town area and then the rural area. So you kind of get a taste of what life was like in both of those kind of environments. And then in the Folk Park in Omagh, we're really looking at the story of migration. So it's looking at people from Ulster who then migrated to North America. So we're looking at the 18th and 19th centuries and their experiences of migrating to for a new life there in North America. So they're similar in some respects, but different in others in the sense of the stories they tell. Both of them have similar collections to an extent because both of them we need a very strong domestic life collection, because obviously we need to furnish the houses and the shops and all the buildings. So we do have a lot of furniture and small, right down to very small items, personal possessions as well that people would have had. Lots of objects that reflect, various working life and various jobs that people did. So yeah, it's quite a varied collection, and at both sites, but they all very much focus back down to people and how people lived and how they interacted with one another and things like that. So my background is in social history, so they're both perfect sites for that, because it is looking at the personal experience and how people kind of live their lives and what kind of decisions they made in life, whether it's to stay at home or to migrate. So yeah.
And yeah, it's because I had the privilege to go visit yourselves in Cultra, God, only a couple of months ago now, but actually getting to walk around and to see it firsthand, it was fascinating. I wonder, how do you think about your, like, to you, what is the role of a museum like that? Like, when we're engaging with audiences, and ultimately that's what a lot of, we collectively are spending an awful lot of time thinking about and talking about, how we engage with audiences. Like, what do you see your, by you, I mean the museums generally, what's your role in engaging with the audiences? What are you hoping to achieve?
Well, say taking the Folk Museum at Culshaw is kind of an example, something we are doing there at the minute and across all our sites, but for the Folk Museum we're looking at a master plan for all of our sites. But for the Folk Museum, it is looking now, we're kind of sort of looking at how the museum connects with visitors today. So it's about making those personal connections with visitors and really bringing the museum up to the 21st century, if you like. Not necessarily changing all the buildings to modern times or anything like that, but it's sort of looking at it through a lens of today's audiences and saying, what can people learn from the past? Also trying to emphasize that this is our story, this is their collections, and we want them to have a personal connection to the stories we're telling and the objects we have and the objects we collect. So really what it is relevance. We want the museums to be relevant to people, that they feel that they can learn from them, that they can get something from them, because obviously in today's world there's so much choice for people now to what they do in their leisure time or what they actually spend their time on. So I think relevance is a key part of that. We want the museums to be a place where people think that they're getting something from, and that they feel valued when they come through our doors, that they're welcome, and that they can hopefully participate in our collections and what we hold. So that's really at the heart of what we hope we can ensure we do at all sites.
And it does feel like there is kind of this very conscious effort between so many museums, kind of locally, nationally, internationally, to actually enable guests shape that sense of ownership. And civic pride is a phrase that we talk about in the museum a lot, in Little Museum. And like, when you're talking about this idea of ownership, involvement, and kind of I guess really enabling people to engage with social history in that sense, like, what would be the couple of pieces within your collection that you're particularly proud to display, or that you think are particularly important to engaging audiences?
I think, say, as at the Folk Museum, as an example, for us, it really is that immersion factor, I think. So the buildings themselves, we classify as part of our collection. They're objects in their own right, but it's that ability to actually go through the doors of a house or a shop or a school, whatever it is, and really just to immerse yourself in the collection that's around you. So having that ability is quite unique as an outdoor museum site, because it's not in the traditional sense of seeing objects maybe behind glass or things like that. So it's that sort of feeling that you get by interacting as you go around the outdoor museums at both sites, but also then interacting with the visitor guides that are on both the sites. So getting that level of interaction between you and the guide, talking to them, getting a bit of a more understanding about the building that you're in and what the history is associated with it. So yeah, both of the outdoor museums are quite unique in that respect, that you can kind of get right up, you know, close to the collections, and also have good conversations with the guides as you go round, rather than maybe anything in particular that would be necessarily, you know, like a star piece. It's sort of getting that sense of going round and just becoming immersed in this environment and sort of getting a sense of what life was like for people.
And you do feel like you step into it. Like, I do remember my own first experience. I kind of objectively, I knew where I was going and what I was about to experience, but I did have that moment where I turned a corner and suddenly I was part of it.
Yeah.
And it's special. It's such a lovely, engaging way to actually experience our history. And it was, you know, as a guest, it was a lovely privilege to have that experience. But then I guess kind of, you know, taking kind of a step sideways, like our relationship between the Little Museum, the National Museums, and this was, you know, these were conversations that we started having a number of years ago, kind of exploring the ways that our remits might overlap and ways that we might collaborate and work together. And I guess I'd love to just hear a little bit about how you approached looking at artifacts that you might want to display in Dublin, and kind of how you approached that process.
Yeah, so how it kind of how word came to us as, I guess, the curators, was that, you know, we were told about the partnership, and we were given kind of a little brief about, you know, what the exhibition was going to be about and the types of objects that we were asked to sort of think about and look for. So I think the main headline for us was about what do we have in our collections that sort of speaks to what Northern Ireland is, you know, a little slice of information about, you know, the place that is Northern Ireland. So yeah, I think we were asked to maybe pull together suggestions of, you know, maybe 5 or 6 objects. And because I hadn't been in my role that long, I think I gave it a couple of extra as well, because I wasn't really sure, you know, am I maybe going a bit too off piste with things or whatever. So I thought I'd pick a few, and luckily a lot of mine actually were chosen. I think one of the things that maybe helped with that was because I'd been to the Little Museum a few years before. So I kind of had an idea of, you know, what the Little Museum was about and what it was like, and that it is a bit tongue-in-cheek, and you know, you don't really know what to expect when you look around the walls, or maybe look up a bit or down, and there's things in corners and all that kind of thing. So I thought I would try and choose a few things that were maybe a wee bit more out there, and then a few that are a bit more serious, if you like. So it really was a case of doing an initial sort of search in our database, just sort of some keywords. So, you know, maybe looking for things, you know, that maybe had in the record, like Northern Ireland or partition or Ulster, and then really taking a bit of a journey into the stores, just to sort of see what caught my eye, you know, what to me was sort of speaking about the place that is Northern Ireland. And a couple of the objects I chose actually also came from our library. So we do have an extensive sort of archive and library at the Folk Museum. So there's a couple of items that I chose that were sort of paper-based items that came from there. And again, they had actually just came to mind because I'd came across them in the library, you know, as I was looking through. And yeah, I just kind of came to the objects from that regard. Yeah, so it was just sort of thinking about, you know, what Ulster, what people might think of Northern Ireland, what maybe comes to mind, you know, when people think of the place. So, for example, I wanted something to reflect agriculture as a theme, or farming, because obviously that's a big industry and has been for many years in Ireland generally, and the north. So I was conscious that a new Little Museum obviously is quite little, so I didn't want to suggest something huge, you know, like a plough or a tractor or something like that. So I wanted something that was sort of agriculture, farming themed, and then I came across, just on a kind of whim, this model of a pig. And then when I delved a little deeper, it had quite an interesting story about it actually then being a breed that ultimately became extinct. And
Mm.
then I was sort of thinking then, about connotations of, almost like throwaway uh, fashion and culture, like how things kind of come into vogue and then almost forgotten about, or, kind of disregarded. And I
Yeah,
thought
and
that had a bit of a bittersweet sort of story behind it.
like the Ulster Pig, I remember you telling me the story months ago, and I found it felt sad. And I'd love you. Yeah, would you
Yeah.
tell me the story of the now extinct Ulster Pig?
Yeah. So originally that model, it actually was one of a number that was on display in our old agricultural gallery. So the models were made by quite a well-known and respected model maker. And that one in particular, when I read the database entry, it mentioned about it being a large white Ulster pig, and then finding out, kind of it became extinct. So I was just sort of looking a bit more detail about, why that particular breed did become extinct and things like that. So at one time it was very popular in terms of the meat that it produced.
Mm.
It was quite a docile type of pig, so it was easy to keep. So it had lots of things going for it.
Mm.
But as obviously agriculture and farming methods intensified, it was actually a difficult pig to transport because it had quite delicate skin. So it actually then got sort of superseded by sort of thicker skinned pigs, and people's tastes changed in terms of it produced quite like a fatty, rich flavour, and then the taste changed to something a bit different. So ultimately, it ended up kind of being, sort of thrown by the wayside, if you like. But I think the label I wrote for that, it was we were kind of given a bit of a steer from yourselves about not being too putting our personal spin on the labels and stuff, and not being too, straight laced. So I just sort of did a play on thinking about, obviously ourselves today, having delicate skin is usually a pretty good thing, and looking after your skin and this, that, and the other. But obviously it wasn't a good thing for this particular pig.
Mm.
And eventually it became, kind of extinct and replaced by other breeds.
Mm.
So yeah, it was just a strange story that I wasn't really necessarily looking for. It just sort of came to be.
But
Um,
you got quite a like in the artifacts that you've presented to the guests coming into Little Museum as part of this exhibition. The spectrum of stories that you're telling is really fascinating, because you go from the now extinct Ulster Pig to like one of the things I was only reading back over it earlier on today in kind of preparation for this conversation, like the pocket guide produced by the US government during the Second World War, which is this kind of briefing guide for American soldiers. Like the idea that I guess, sorry, rather than me tell the story, you're far better placed than I am. But like, tell me about the pocket guide and the types of insight that we actually take from something like that.
Yeah, so the pocket guide, I'd been aware of that before actually, because in a previous role, I think we had one in the collection. So I remembered it from, a few years before. And
Mm.
then when I came across it in the library, I thought that could be a good one because, yeah, it does have an interesting story to tell. If you did actually Google it, by the way, you can get it online, so you can read it in full from home. I think the BBC website or something has it, and you can just sort of easily, read it from home, because it is quite interesting and it's not too long. But basically, it was designed, as you say, it was put together to prepare American troops who were going to be stationed in Northern Ireland, to give them sort of a bit of a heads up about what life was going to be like for them when they got here. So it talks about things, some very serious things, and then a bit more lighthearted things. But it talks about, obviously, if we're thinking around 1939 to 45 era or thereabouts, maybe 20 odd years on from partition. But it talks in the little book about there being, two Irelands, and being kind of conscious of the border and politics. Also talks around religion, about, if anyone asks your religion, it's very much interlinked with politics, and people are kind of wanting to see, what side you sit on, so to speak. But then it gets a bit more lighthearted in terms of just sort of how cultures are different from, say, Americans to someone in Northern Ireland, in terms of etiquette even, or how to maybe approach girls, women, that kind of thing, or what not to do or what to do.
Am I right in thinking it did actually have kind of hints on kind of good conversation topics and like ways to, start a conversation or lead a kind of a positive conversation?
Yeah, definitely. It gives you lots of hints and tips. Even like your etiquette when you're maybe in a pub, things like that. It even talks about you're not going to get a lot of coffee, which Americans maybe were more used to, but you're going to get a lot of tea, and you're just going to have to kind of be polite and deal with it. So yeah, it is really fascinating. The things that obviously whoever was working on it thought that they should know, and what they might encounter when they arrived, and kind of how that the meeting of these two cultures. And it's just interesting to think about then, not only them coming to Northern Ireland, but then, what their presence in Northern Ireland then had, for local people. They had, different dance styles, just different ways of talking, different food that they ate, all that kind of thing. So it's just very interesting to see, kind of how that sort of clash of cultures came to be. And I think a few years ago, again, it reminded me when I was sort of, looking up a wee bit of information about the pocket guide, but there was I think it was on the BBC, it was a 2016 programme called My Mother and Other Strangers, and I think it was inspired by the pocket guide, and kind of it looks at a local family, and then the Americans come in and just sort of how they all interacted with one another. So yeah, I just thought it was very interesting to sort of see, this little guidebook, and kind of all the little rules and regulations and hints and tips it gave.
Yeah.
And I wondered at the time, did local people, did they ever get a chance to read it, and on what they made of it?
That would have been a fascinating conversation, Jeannie Mac. Yeah, because it's interesting, because you're kind of going, they're the Irish, they like their tea, manage your expectations, but it's even the cup of coffee that's fascinating. But it's interesting because like it's one of two pieces that you included here, where so through the pocket guide you've got the American government briefing the American soldiers during the Second World War as to what arriving in Northern Ireland is going to be like. But then you also had the 1962 holiday guide, which again, this was for American guests, if I'm correct, is it? Or was this?
Well, or just sort of like a tourist brochure. So yes, it could have appealed to, say, American visitors, or indeed any, visitors visiting from, outside Northern Ireland. So again, it was another library pick, and that one, I think I just came across it really, and I just find it interesting because I think it's dated to 1962, so it kind of predates the Troubles era, if you like. And it was just interesting to see on the cover there's the Giant's Causeway, and that's something that obviously we still promote vigorously, and people love to come to see the Giant's Causeway. So it was interesting to see in the 60s, and even before that, I suppose really the main tourist market started booming sort of around the Victorian era, and as sort of travel opened up for people, you would have people coming across maybe the water to visit, say, Ireland or the north or what have you. So it was just interesting to see how the main sort of attraction hasn't really changed, but I just thought it was quite, again, bittersweet in a sense that it was just right before kind of the years before the Troubles, and how then thinking about then during the Troubles, how lots of different things were impacted, but obviously tourism was as well. People aren't going to maybe consider coming to somewhere where they had fear of coming into violence and things like that. So it was sort of looking at that as well in terms of the impact of the Troubles and on tourism. And then sort of thinking then today about how there has been such a great resurgence, because we've got lots of things now being promoted, say for example around Game of Thrones and things like that. We've just had like a really giant new attraction with the Game of Thrones studios has opened up not too far from where I live. So there has been a real resurgence with that, and the cruise ships and things like that would have been unheard of during the Troubles. You wouldn't have had that footfall coming in. So it's interesting to see sort of the peaks and the lows, highs and lows of sort of fortunes of the tourism industry.
Yeah, but then the booming resurgence going on today, as you say, and it is, you know, the scale of the kind of the tourism proposition at the moment, it's an incredible thing. And like, because the kind of, like, it's fascinating to see the insights that we're getting kind of through external eyes. And then one of the things I've meant to ask you about this before, but I don't think we've had a chance to talk about it. One of the pieces that you have on display in the exhibition is the home rule game. And I guess the purpose of this was, it was kind of a board game, for lack of, or not a board game, but kind of an arcade game of sorts, that looked at simplifying the complexities of home rule into a physical game. And I'd love you to tell me, or to explain to me, like, who created a game like that? And who was it for? Like, how did a game like that come to be?
Yeah, it is interesting, and I did kind of do a bit more digging into it, but like, from what we know about it, we don't know a lot about it. So
Yeah.
we don't know who actually made it, or I couldn't find how it came to be in our collections necessarily. But it is a very interesting thing. It's not something I've seen before, so it is. I don't know how many of them were made, or was it only a very small number, or maybe there are more like them out there. It's just not something I've seen before. But it is a very interesting thing. It's sort of, on one side you've kind of got a map of Ireland, and on the other side you've got this coffin sort of depicting home rule. And the idea is to sort of, there's little tacks or nails, and it's kind of a thing you would sort of shake, to get the little nails in the holes of the coffin. So it's kind of, depicting, this quite serious situation in a little game. And yeah, it's just interesting. It was a sort of a propaganda type tool. Who was it designed for? Was it sort of an adult audience, something that you would maybe have, an after dinner type game?
Yeah.
Or is it more, directed to younger audiences, and sort of getting those political ideas in young people's minds? Or maybe it wasn't necessarily devised for that, but if you had that in your house and it is sort of a game, you could have younger audiences playing with it and sort of being unaware of kind of the deeper message in it.
Because it does look like a toy that I remember having from childhood that probably had some kind of, incidental image on it, but the principle of it is a toy that you remember from youth.
Yeah. So it's a very strange object. Like nothing, I've not come across it, as I say, or anything like it before. To have something so political associated with something that you would sort of associate with fun and joy and sort of recreation side of things. So yeah, I just thought that was a really interesting thing, like who actually came up with that, as a sort of concept.
Yeah, it is fascinating. But then again, it's kind of with social history, it's how do we use objects to talk about wider themes and issues and moments and kind of experiences that we've had. And like, I know the Lambic drummer is someone that you included as well. And like, tell me about its significance and kind of how it came to be within the exhibition.
Well, again, that was just something that did catch my eye. I was going around the store, and it is quite a colourful object. It's sort of, he's got sort of blue trousers on. He's got his Lambic drum, which is sort of an orange colour. So it was quite eye-catching. It's sort of hand-painted thing. And I sort of thought to myself, oh, okay, something that does maybe come up in people's minds is around sort of the 12th of July, and maybe something that Northern Ireland, Ulster is sort of associated and known for, maybe something that would appear in the news and things like that, outside visitors, might make that connection with. And again, it was another sort of practical side for choosing that particular item was in terms of size, because obviously, we should have got a Lambic drum itself, but obviously the size of that would have been overwhelming for the space we were working to. So this was like an object that I thought would be much more easy to display. But yeah, it's essentially this little Lambic drummer, and it's quite nice because the way whoever's made it, again, I don't know who actually did make it as such, but it's described in our database is hand painted at least. It doesn't really go into too much detail, just sort of says, roughly made to an extent, because it's not sort of, it does have that kind of almost handmade look to it. But the way whoever's made it, they've created this sort of shape where you see the arms of the drummer kind of stretched around the side of the drum. So I just thought that really spoke to me, because when I look at the object, because obviously I'm from the north, and we very much associate the 12th, and you sort of think then of the music and the noise of the 12th and things like that. So the drum obviously being probably the loudest sound that you'll hear on the 12th of July. I just thought that would be a good one to include, because I can't remember the word, but when you I think there is a word for it if you see something, but you can also associate the sound with it. I think there might be a word for that, but when I look at that, that's what I sort of think of. I can sort of hear, the band playing, and sort of then you sort of think about the marching and the procession and things like that. So I just thought that was quite a nice one. And again, I think it said in the label, in terms of the the weight of these drums, and sort of the pressure on the shoulders, and sort of the weight of it as someone was marching and walking. I think that's quite nicely conveyed sort of in the scale of the man and the actual drum that he's holding, because they're very heavy items. So it's not something that you can walk super long distances with and things like that. So it is quite a skill to be able to kind of hold this and use it and things like that. So there's just some quite nice wee touches in it that I thought were quite interesting when you sort of looked a bit closer at it.
Yeah, he is, as far as a figure goes, it's in a very evocative image that you can see a lot in it, and it's kind of there is that multisensory element, as you say. And so because you've got within those kind of half a dozen pieces, you're touching on quite a number of different parts of Northern Irish history. You're talking about a lot of different events and occurrences and different things. And I kind of wonder, when you look at those artifacts kind of together in the context of the other artifacts owned by kind of some of your other colleagues that are featuring within the exhibition, I wonder what your hope was in terms of the takeaway that a guest would have in visiting the exhibition, in talking to our team, in kind of really exploring the captions and get to know the collection.
I think one of the main thing is just about the complexity of our place. In terms of the duration that we've been an entity, only, since partition, 100 odd years, there's a lot to unpack in quite a sort of small amount of time in terms of the story of Northern Ireland. So I just thought the selection of objects that are on display, it's a very eclectic mix we've got on display from different colleagues and things like that. But I think it's really just to tell or to emphasize to visitors that it is a complex place. There's many layers to it. But also hopefully that we're encouraging people to maybe get a taste of what Northern Ireland's about, what the collections are about, and hopefully then maybe encourage visitors who are maybe visiting Dublin to then think about maybe heading up north for a day or two and spending some time in the north as well. But also some of the things that you see in the objects in the exhibition, it's all again about sort of commonality and experience too. So you do kind of then, when you come out of there into the rest of the little museum, you'll see that there's similarities too as well as difference. So again, it's about that sort of commonality and shared experience, and people maybe supporting a certain cause, or this, that and the other, or just trying to get through their daily lives. It's all very similar in one sense, kind of one person's experience to another, but then obviously there are then the differences too. So I think there's some nice takeaways in terms of comparing and contrasting with it being at the Little Museum, that people can take about the experiences of people from Dublin compared to people experiences in Belfast or the north. So I think that's quite a nice thing that we're able to do based at the Little Museum, having that ability to kind of do that.
Yeah, it's lovely. Yeah, like it is something I've had the nice fortune of witnessing firsthand over the last couple of months, that you do, you know, I walk through the gallery a couple of times every day. You know, you'll make a point of stopping and talking to the human being that happens to be in front of you the day or the moment you go in. And it is the human is the topic of conversation that seems to regularly be, that it all seems to come back to, that we're through the exhibition, it feels like we're talking about key moments in history, we're talking about concepts and ideas, but it's also stripping back from that and talking about human beings. And I think when we look at the exhibition title, You Say You Love Me, but You Don't Even Know Me, that is so inherently small and human. And it feels like that's actually happening. And I'm so immensely grateful to yourself and your colleagues that we're actually having these conversations. And it is something that I know we're really proud to be part of. Um, but I know that this is kind of, and it's this focus on the human and the real stories and the social history, like that's something that is very central to the work that you and your colleagues are doing. Like I know you were saying you recently you launched or you're launching an exhibition. Um, is it the Banbridge exhibition, and you're working with a number of academics?
Yeah, so we launched that just a few weeks ago, last month, down at the Ulster Folk Park in Omagh. So yeah, it's an exhibition where we've partnered with two academics, one from Queen's University Belfast and one from the Ulster University. And over the last few years, they've been working on a research project called Bad Bridget, and it's looking at women's experiences of migrating to North America into urban centres like Boston, New York and Toronto. But their take on it was to look at records like prison records, police records and things like that. The people that maybe wouldn't make, other types of records, the people that fell between the cracks, so to speak. And what they're looking at is they looked at their experiences, what happened to them. Obviously, by looking at the police and prison records, they came up against, the law for one reason or another. So it kind of really aligned, with our trajectory at the Ulster Folk Park in terms of we've identified a number of narratives that we'd want to explore and highlight further there. So one being sort of migration to urban centres is something that we don't explore fully at the Ulster Folk Park at present, but also looking at women, in quite detail and depth. That's something that doesn't necessarily happen as much as we'd like. So it really was quite a good marriage between the research that Elaine Farrell and Leanne McCormick were doing, and then what our aspirations were for the Folk Park. So over the last couple of years, we've been working with them. It's an AHRC funded project, Arts and Humanities Research Council, and we worked with them. So it's really an amalgamation of their research and then our collections. So we've got 150 or so objects in the exhibition. And then we've worked alongside a number of creatives, so mostly female, actually, just given the nature of the exhibition, it came to kind of pass. But we have lots of lovely illustrations in the exhibition, quite vibrant and bold and modern, done by Fiona McDonnell. And I think
wonderful woman.
Yeah, you might know. Yeah,
she did. So, we worked with her on a project about Centre Eileen Flynn. She's incredible.
Yeah. So it's along her style. Obviously, if you know it, it's quite, kind of almost like a comic book style, very colourful, vibrant.
Right. Gorgeous. Yeah, amazing.
And then we work with an author called Jan Carson.
Oh yeah.
So she actually wrote all of the text for the exhibition, and it's in, I think the way she calls it, it's we person plural. I think whatever it's in the plural. So basically you go round and you're in the voice, you read it as the voice of the Bad Bridget. So it's all very much in the we tone, and it really brings you around the exhibition kind of as a personal experience then of what these women experienced when they left Ireland in hopes of a better life, and sometimes that wasn't necessarily the case. So it is a really sort of unique departure for us there, and something that so far has been really well received. I was in Omagh today, and we have little sort of feedback wall where people can sort of put up little cards about what they thought. We had some lovely ones today. One person said they actually got more from visiting the exhibition than they did their history degree, so that was great.
Oh, take the compliment.
Someone said they loved it to love Bad Bridget to the moon and back. So it's lovely just to get those bits of feedback that people are really engaging with it and sort of connecting with these women's stories, and that it's there again common strands that people experience today when they migrate, in terms of going somewhere, feeling alienated, trying to sort of get themselves into a job or a place to live when they move somewhere new, and some of the barriers they come across when they go somewhere different, and just trying to settle in somewhere, a new place. So yeah, that was a really interesting exhibition to work on, and to be able to work with the academics as well was great.
Absolutely, but it's an amazing thing that, but even just listening, and again, the public feedback is so important, because that's us as an industry kind of seeing how we're honestly doing. But by the sounds of it, when you're looking at such a fascinating narrative, such an undertold story, or one that's kind of one that has yet to get the full space that it deserves, it's gorgeous to see a story like that being told. And then again, got the team that you're working with it sounds like an incredible project. And again, this is really what's, I think, now that society is reopening and our doors are open and with people coming back in to visit museums and to engage with culture again, it shows us what's possible, and it's really exciting to see. And I guess kind of looking at what exciting things are happening, like when you think about the years ahead, when you think about your work, the work of the museum more widely, or just the kind of the museum sector more generally, when we think about the future, what are you excited about? What are you hopeful for?
I think for our sites, as I mentioned earlier, like we have master plans for all 4 of our museums, and kind of going back to that thing I talked about earlier about relevance. We really do want to build that connection with visitors, and really make them feel that all of our sites are places for them to come to feel safe in and to enjoy. So having that kind of that ethos or mindset, from the very top of our organization, flowing right down, that is very exciting, to know that we are planning for the future, and we want visitors to be as connected as possible to the museums and feel that it's their collections and it's their stories. So being able to work somewhere like that sort of does have people and the public and the visitors at the heart of what we do, or aspiring to kind of connect with them as much as possible. The possibilities then are endless, and there's lots, I think, to look forward to with all our sites. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the years to come and seeing what exhibitions we do and what programs we put on and things like that. And yeah, hopefully making a difference to people's lives, even it is even that feel good factor of having visited somewhere and feeling like you've find out something new, or you've really enjoyed coming with your children or your grandparents and things like that, and just being able to connect and engage with each other, and just trying to get to know history and how we all ended up where we are today. And I think there's a lot to learn from that. That's one of the reasons why I started learning history and why I wanted to study history was it's about looking at the past in order to hopefully then inform the present and the future, and being of a gaining that information then to kind of lead as good a life as we can, and what we'll leave them behind for future generations as well.
Yeah, it's everything, and it's I to be honest, I don't think we could have come to a more natural conclusion to this conversation. It is the past is our ticket to the future, but no, Victoria, we are so immensely proud to be working with you, your colleagues, and with the National Museums, and I more generally. Like, it's been an absolute privilege, and I really sincerely appreciate you taking the time this evening to actually sit down and talk through it with me. It's been lovely to talk about the artifacts in a bit more detail, but also just more generally about your work. So sincerely, thank you.
No problem at all. Thank you very much. And yeah, it was great I saw the exhibition last week in Dublin, so it was lovely to go back to the Little Museum and see it all on display. So it looked lovely, and yeah, really great to be back.
Thank you. And then to everyone who's been with us here this evening and is going to watch this back after the fact, thank you so much for taking the time. So this has been another 120 Dublin Stories with Santa Rita and the Little Museum. And this evening was a special talk as part of the You Say You Love Me, but You Don't Even Know Me exhibition, which is run in partnership with National Museums NI and the Department of Foreign Affairs. My guest this evening has been Victoria Millar, the Senior Curator of History for the National Museums NI. So thank you so much.